Hey, welcome back to the Building Bible Literacy Podcast. Last week we took a small break. I was on vacation visiting my brother out in the Pacific Northwest. It was an awesome time. I'm the oldest of four kids in my family. Not counting my wife, who takes the top spot, I can honestly say that my brothers and sister, they're my best friends. It wasn't always that way, what with there being a not insignificant age difference, but in our adult years, our relationships with each other have become more and more important. I'm truly grateful then that my relationships with my brothers and sister makes it difficult for me to fully relate to Jacob and Esau. I just can't imagine hating any of them, let alone on the level that Jacob and Esau felt about each other in their early years. Last episode, we continued our review of Genesis. Esau traded his future for a meal. Jacob, with his mother's help, deceived Esau and his father Isaac. Jacob is then forced to flee, moves far away back to the homeland of his mother, and hopes to find a wife. And yet, God remained faithful to his promise. He meets Jacob along the way in a dream, and he extends his covenant promise to this liar and deceiver. Jacob has a come to God moment. He says that if this God that his father and his grandfather worshipped, if this God will be with him on his journey, he will follow him too. And this brings us to Genesis chapter 29. Jacob arrives in the eastern country that his mother came from, and he meets his future wife, Rachel. Well, I should say he meets one of his future wives. Now, there are a number of examples in the Old Testament of polygamous relationships, meaning a man being married or having sexual relationships with multiple women. It's important for us to understand, though, that these are descriptive examples, not prescriptive. And what I mean by that is that the text of Scripture is simply telling us about these relationships. It's not telling us that they are the correct way or the wise way to have relationships. And that is made clear in the story of Jacob. First, he meets Rachel, falls head over heels for her, and decides to ask her father, Laban, if he can marry her. Laban agrees, but ends up tricking Jacob. See, after a period of time where Jacob worked for him, there's a wedding, there's the ceremony, there's the wedding night, and then Jacob wakes up the next morning and it's not Rachel in bed with him. It's actually her older sister, Leah. And Jacob is furious, okay? His father-in-law is like, hey, we have a custom. The older sister has to get married first, but I'll give you Rachel too. Jacob says, yeah, give me Rachel. That's the one I wanted to marry. So now there's two sisters who are married and co-equal wives to Jacob, but Jacob never wanted to marry Leah. In fact, the text clearly says in chapter 29, verse 30, that Jacob loved Rachel more than her older sister Leah. From the very beginning, we know Leah is not in a good relationship. She's able to have kids fairly quickly. Apparently, Jacob loved that part of marriage, but Rachel seems to not be able to have kids of her own. Now, because Rachel is battling with her sister Leah, she gives her slave, Bilhah, to Jacob as a secondary wife. And then later, Leah gives her slave Zilpah to Jacob as another secondary wife. This gets confusing as we read because the text uses the same Hebrew word for all four of these individuals, and that's Isha. And this word means woman, but also means wife. So one might read Genesis 29:31 through 30:24 and conclude that Jacob had four wives, all of whom had equal standing. But culturally, this would not have been the case. Leah and Rachel were the primary wives. Zilpah and Bilhah were secondary wives, meaning that each of their individual standing as wife was based on Leah and Rachel extending that title to them. We see later in chapter 35, verse 22, after Rachel had unfortunately died, that it says that Reuben, the oldest son of Jacob, and whose mother was Leah, he sleeps with his father's concubine, Bilhah. The same one who had the title of wife is now described with the Hebrew word pilegesh. Bilhah no longer has the title of wife and is now simply a woman who Jacob had relations with because Rachel, the Isha, was dead. I know this sounds morbid, but that's just how it worked. Leah and Rachel were the primary wives. Their slaves were given to Jacob to have kids with, and those kids' legal standing was based on their relationship with Jacob, not their birth moms. So in total, Jacob had 12 sons through these 4 women. All of his sons have full rights and privileges as true sons of Jacob. Through Leah, there's Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. And through Zilpah, Leah's slave, there's Gad and Asher. Through Rachel, the favorite, there's Joseph and later Benjamin. Through Bilhah, Rachel's slave, there's Dan and Naphtali. Gad and Asher's birth mother was Zilpah. Again, they had legal standing right alongside Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun because of Leah. Dan and Naphtali's birth mother was Bilhah, and they had their legal standing alongside Joseph and Benjamin. Again, not because of Bilhah, but because of Rachel. And there's a lot more that can be said about this section of chapters 29 and 30 beyond relationships and polygamy. Like Leah's yearning for love from her husband, Rachel's agony with infertility, Bilhah and Zilpah being used as surrogate mothers and pawns in Leah and Rachel's sibling rivalry, even the weird attribution of the blessing of children to God. For example, in chapter 30, verse 18, Leah says that God has rewarded her for giving her slave to her husband. Did God actually reward her for doing that? Honestly, I have my doubts. I think she's just expressing her hope or her opinion. It's kind of like when a diehard football fan says something like, God allowed my team to win because I prayed for it. As we move forward from chapter 30, we need to keep in mind that Jacob now has 11 sons. The 12th is born to Rachel later in chapter 35, when she unfortunately dies as a result of hard labor. The relationship between Leah's 6 kids, Rachel's 2 kids, Zilpah's 2 kids, and Bilhah's 2 kids is extremely tense, as we're going to see later. Now in chapter 33, as Jacob is returning to his father Isaac with his 4 wives, 11 sons, and 1 daughter, he sees that his brother Esau is on his way toward him. This is the same Esau who said that as soon as their father died, he was going to kill Jacob. And Esau is now coming towards him with 400 men. So Jacob is, understandably, a bit on edge. He spreads out his wives and kids, noticeably putting Zilpah and Bilhah with their 4 kids first, and then Leah with her 6 kids, and then Rachel and her son Joseph at the very back. So, yeah, definitely no favorites here. Jacob goes first, and he and Esau meet. And Esau hugs him, kisses him. They weep, and they're reunited. These brothers who just stabbed each other in the back and hated each other after all the lying and the treachery that we talked about in the last episode, it's genuinely nice to see a positive turn. Skipping ahead, Jacob and his family, they settle in the land of Canaan, the land that Isaac had been in, the land that Abraham had been in. Rachel's second son, Benjamin, is born, and she passes away. Isaac, Jacob's father, also dies. And with that, the story of Joseph begins. And this lasts for 13 chapters, and it's going to wrap up the book of Genesis. But before finishing today, let's take a look at chapter 37, because it ties in really well with the parentage drama from chapters 29 and 30. Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob, the first son of Rachel, was his father's favorite. Rachel was the favorite wife. Leah was the accidental wife. Bilhah and Zilpah were bystanders who got caught in the crossfire between 2 sisters. Honestly, I don't have a better way to describe them. Let's read Genesis 37, verses 1 through 4. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. These are the family records of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. The young man was working with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age, and he made a robe of many colors for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. I want you to put yourself in Joseph's shoes. You're 17 years old. You have 10 older brothers, the oldest having about 13 years on you or so. You've known your whole life that your dad likes you more than your older brothers. Not just likes you more, but loves you more than your older brothers. In fact, your dad makes no secret of it. Like, how are you going to behave if this is the context in which you're raised? Probably, honestly, exactly like Joseph did. And that's with a bit of a swagger. Dad, you'll never guess what Gad, Asher, Dan, and Naphtali did while they were supposed to be watching your sheep. They were so irresponsible. Jacob knows that he isn't being fair, and he doesn't care. Joseph is his favorite. Sure, the other boys are his sons too, but Joseph deserves the best. So Jacob spends considerable time and resources making a robe for Joseph with a variety of colors. Everyone's going to see him dress up. They're going to know that Jacob spared no expense on his son. None of his other kids, none of them get anything nearly as nice as Joseph. Everyone can see that Joseph is the favorite. Everyone can see it, including his brothers. And his brothers hate him. They hate Joseph so much. They may share the same dad, but that's not their fault. They hate this 17-year-old kid. Joseph then has a dream. And in his dream, it appears as though his brothers all bowed down to him. These are his older brothers, the brothers who don't get preferential treatment or fancy clothes. Joseph tells his brothers about his dream and how they're going to bow down to him. And how do you think they take it? Not well. Are they going to bow down to their younger, spoiled brother? I think not. They hate him even more now. And then Joseph has yet another dream. And again, he shares it with his brothers. He's got to know that this bothers them, right? He's got to. He's not a child. He's 17 years old. He can no doubt see the anger in their faces. Hey, brothers. Guess what? I had another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars, they're all bowing down to me. What do you think of that? And this finally gets Jacob to say something. In verse 10, he says, "What kind of dream is this?" Finally, there's a little bit of parenting happening, but it's not much. A little while later, his 10 older brothers, they're out with the sheep, not just like for the afternoon, but for days or weeks at a time. They're far off with the herds. Jacob sends Joseph out to them. So Joseph makes the trek out, and as he approaches, his brothers see him in the distance. And we pick up in verses 19 and 20 of chapter 37. They said to one another, "Oh, look, here comes that dream expert. So now, come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say that a vicious animal ate him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." And to his credit, Reuben, the oldest, he does try to save Joseph. He convinces them not to outright murder their little brother, but to throw him into a pit that they had found. Now, Reuben, he plans to go rescue Joseph from this pit later. He's going to send him back home safely, but his plans go sideways. So let's read. This is, again, chapter 37. We'll start at verse 23. I'm going to read through verse 36 and get the whole story here. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off Joseph's robe, the robe of many colors that he had on. Then they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty, without water. They sat down to eat a meal, and when they looked up, there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying aromatic gum, balsam, and resin, going down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come on, Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When Midianite traders passed by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone! What am I going to do?" So they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a male goat, and dipped the robe in its blood. They sent the robe of many colors to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it. Is it your son's robe or not?" His father recognized it. "It is my son's robe," he said. "A vicious animal has devoured him. Joseph has been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth around his waist, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will go down to Sheol, to the grave, to my son, mourning." And his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guards. Let's leave the story there for today. As I reflect on the beginning of Joseph's story, I'm struck by how many things had to happen to get to this point. What if Jacob hadn't cheated his brother Esau? What if Laban hadn't tricked Jacob? What if Jacob had loved both of his wives equally, or at the very least put a stop to their quarreling? What if he hadn't played favorites with his boys? What if he had corrected Joseph's behavior? What if? What if? All right, I'll see you next week. We're going to continue building our literacy of the Bible together. I encourage you to keep reading Scripture. And as always, remember to stay humble.